Some say this is an original version of a familiar fairy tale, as told by the Roman historian Strabo in the 1st century BC. Long ago, in the ancient land of Egypt, where the green waters of the Nile flow into the blue Mediterranean Sea, lived a young maiden named Rhodobis. She was born in Greece, but kidnapped by pirates and sold into slavery in Egypt. Her master was a kind old man, but spent most of his time sleeping beneath a tree, and so he never saw how the other servant girls teased and tormented Rhodobis because she looked different from them. Where their hair was straight and black, hers was curly and golden. Their eyes were brown, and hers were green. Their skin had the glow of copper, but her skin was pale and burnt easily in the sun, and they called her Rosy Rhodobis, and they gave her even more chores to do outside. Do the washing by the river, chase the geese from the garden, bake the bread, pull the weeds. And poor Rhodobis had no human friends, only the animals. She trained the birds to eat from her hand, and a monkey to ride on her shoulder. And an old hippopotamus would slide up out of the mud and lay himself on the banks just to be closer to her. And at the end of each day, if she wasn't too tired, she would go down to the river banks and sing and dance with her friends. One evening, as the master slept beneath a tree, he awoke to the beautiful voice of Rhodobis, and he saw her light as air dancing across the shores of the river. And he thought, such a talented dancer should not go barefoot. And so he had ordered a beautiful pair of dancing slippers. And when he presented the gift to Rhodobis, she looked at the rosy red, gold-gilded slippers with the beautiful leather soles, and she was so happy. But the other servant girls were more jealous than ever. One day, word arrived that the Pharaoh would be holding court in Memphis, and all the kingdom was invited. Oh, how Rhodobis wanted to go and see the beautiful dancing and singing and wonderful food. And as the other servant girls prepared to leave, wearing their finest clothes, Rhodobis donned her beautiful gold-gilded slippers and followed them down to the raft at the riverbank. But they wouldn't let her aboard. Instead, they gave her a long list of chores to finish before they returned. Do the mending and the washing and pull the weeds and bake the bread and clean, clean, clean. And as they pulled their raft away, a muddy wave sloshed on her beautiful slippers. Rhodobis cried a little song as she carefully washed them and laid them to dry on a rock in the sun. And suddenly, a shadow moved across the sky, and the god Horus in his falcon form swooped down and snatched one of the slippers and flew away. He flew all the way to Memphis, where the Pharaoh was actually quite bored with his own party. He was daydreaming of chasing his chariot off across the desert on some adventure, when suddenly he saw the god Horus flying right towards him, and he dropped the beautiful slipper right into the Pharaoh's lap. Well, the Pharaoh knew that this sign from the gods meant that whoever fit this slipper would be his queen. So quickly he called off the party before the other servant girls even had a chance to arrive. And he called for his chariot and his servants, and off he went looking for the girl who fit the slipper. And he searched Upper and Lower Egypt, with no luck, frankly. So finally, he called for his barge, and he started to make his way down the Nile, and he stopped at every embankment and every house along the way. No one fit the slipper. Eventually, he made his way to the house where Rhodobis lived. And the other servant girls heard the trumpets and the fanfare and the banging of the gongs, and they pushed and they shoved at each other as they raced down to the riverbank to get a glimpse of the pharaoh. And when they saw him, he was holding the rosy red golded slipper that they recognized immediately. And he told them of his search for a queen, and they couldn't get over themselves fast enough to shove and squeeze their foot into that slipper. Of course, it wasn't a fit. The pharaoh could see this as well, and he turned to leave. And as he turned, he saw Rhodobis hiding in the rushes by the river, and he called for her to come out and try on the slipper, which, of course, fit perfectly. And she produced the other slipper from inside her tunic, and the pharaoh pronounced that she would be his queen. The other servant girls were outraged. "But she's not even Egyptian," they yelled. "She's only a slave," they shouted. But the pharaoh shook his head and said, "Oh no, she is more Egyptian than all of us. For her eyes are as green as the Nile, and her hair as feathery as papyrus, and her skin as pink as the lotus flower."